Hello class, this is Mr. DeVries here with our first lecture on chapter 19, um, and it will be involved in the first section, the changing political climate. So thank you for logging in and taking a look at this for your assignment for tonight. What we want to do now is make sure that we are ready for the quiz tomorrow by playing it over. If you're not quite sure, ask any questions in class. First thing we want to mention is post-World War II, the colonial empires were brought to an end. We saw the end of the great British Empire, for example, that spanned throughout most of Africa, Southeast Asia, and really all parts around the world. This so-called Great Liberation brought over 90 new countries, and many of these are what we would call developing countries today. Formerly, these were called third world countries or other nomenclature of that kind. The needs and goals of these new countries has really set where we're going in the post-World War II era. Many of them sought aid. They also needed not only just financial aid, but also in setting up new forms of government. So they were attracted either initially to the Soviet Union's system of communism, or they were wooed by the United States and its allies as part of the NATO, and the particularly with the money that was spent to transform Europe and most of the world through grants and promoting democracy. Unfortunately, many of the countries that recently gained independence were then, the leaders of those independence movements then became the dictators. And what they did oftentimes is take that money and that aid and enrich themselves for their own personal aggrandizement, and used it to suppress the people. So we'll see that throughout the semester as we study these different regions. So as you can see from the map, from the textbook, many of the countries freed were in Africa, and also many were aligned with either one of the superpowers at the time. So we'll be studying, of course, Africa later in chapter 23, and also South Asia in successive chapters. So as I mentioned earlier, the superpowers, the US and the USSR, tried to woo these different countries through aid and through support and economic ties, political ties, as well as economic trade. With the end of the Cold War, however, we see now that these countries are depending more and more on the one world superpower left, the United States, although China, as we now know, is on the upswing and emerging as a world power, attempting to, and they also are trying to gain influence in different regions of the world, particularly in South America now, and anywhere where they can secure resources for their large population. There are also several ethnic and religious conflicts going on that you're aware of currently in Iraq, with the ISIS group trying to persecute Christians, as well as Kurds in northern Iraq and eastern Turkey. Other areas, the Muslims and the Christians in India and the Hindus, also in Palestine, which we'll be studying in depth. In Indonesia, the Philippines, as you see, these all at different times in African countries, there has been suppression of different religious minorities as well. So this will be a recurring theme that we'll study this semester. One attempt to mitigate some of this is developing regional and global organizations. And again, that's going to be a fairly major theme of ours this semester as we study the interdependence leading up to the towards the end of time, when we have all countries and also even religions coming together. So these are some of the themes that we'll be seeing that we talked about yesterday in class, so we see those things coming as we lead towards the coming of Christ. So some of these we're going to be talking about in depth, and you'll be doing some research on a lot of these, like the World Health, G8, International Monetary Fund, all these different groups and many more that are attempting to organize globally. Some of the issues we're going to tackle this semester are weapons, human rights, obviously terrorism in many different forms. It's in the news almost every day. And also our role, we'll be covering later in the chapter, as America, what's our role in stopping this? And I know President Obama recently ordered strikes in northern Iraq against the ISIS group there, and the continuing discussion on what is our proper response. So those are some of the issues: the weapons, how and when to intervene, human rights and terrorism that we discussed. So we also want to talk about the impact of the nuclear proliferation, and how the nuclear-powered countries have so much more clout today in forming societies, and how that came to be in the nuclear realm. So I do want you to take a moment and watch the clip of how the explosions, nuclear detonations has really affected our country and the world for sure. As we go through this animation, I think it's quite telling on class discussion. So let's see if we can get that to play for you. Here it is now. So you notice that 1945, the first explosion, testing the nuclear missile, and then the explosions in Japan to end World War in August of 1945. The two explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then you'll see how quickly this goes on. And what I'd like you to do is to finish watching it by going to the site here, wimp.com/nuclear-explosions /. So you can see that right up here on the top. And I'd like you to watch that for discussion purposes. But you can see up here the flags of the different countries that started explosions. And I think it's going to be a very telling video to see the progress of weapons. That is one of our topics for the semester. All right, thanks for watching, everybody.